Mary Wells, a wealthy middle-aged widow, has been the principal witness in the case of Regina versus Purbeck. She claims to have been defrauded out of over £40,000 by Simon Purbeck, the alleged medium. Or is he, as some claim, the greatest medium of his age? We shall soon know, because today the prosecution complete their case and Simon Purbeck takes the stand. Saint or sinner? That's the question that may be answered today. The medium's own solicitor, Walter Kimber, takes the stand for the prosecution in today's proceedings in Fulchester Crown Court.
Kimber, how do you view the prospect of giving evidence against your own client?
With some trepidation, Your Honour. I've never been forced to divulge privileged information before. But Mr. Purbeck is an honourable man for whom I have the greatest respect and admiration. If he wishes me to give evidence, then I feel I must bow to those wishes.
Very well, Mr. Kimber, if you're quite sure.
What is your religion?
Church of England.
Take the testament in your right hand and read aloud the words on the card.
I swear by Almighty God that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
You are Walter Kimber, solicitor, partner in Kimber, Craddock and Wake of Fulchester?
I am.
And you handle the legal work for the Purbeck Trust?
I do.
And you also handle legal work for Mr. Purbeck personally?
Whenever that is necessary, but it very rarely is, my client detests litigation.
How long have you known Mr. Purbeck?
2.5 years.
And when was the trust set up?
2.5 years ago. That was how I first met Mr. Purbeck.
So Mr. Purbeck came to you to inquire about the setting up of a trust?
Yes. He wanted advice, and I gave it. Later, I drew up the instrument which established that trust.
What is the nature of this trust?
It's a non-profit-making organization with certain specific aims.
And what's its source of income?
Well, some money is raised through Mr. Purbeck's lectures, but mostly through gifts and voluntary contributions.
And what would you estimate are the capital assets of the trust at the moment?
In financial terms?
Yes.
And including the house which Mrs. Wells donated?
Including the house?
Well, very roughly, £44,500.
£44,500, Mr. Kimber?
Well, of course, I may be a few £100 out either way, Your Honour.
And this has all been made in just 2 years?
Yes. Marvellous, isn't it?
Remarkable. Who are the principal agents of the trust?
Mr. Purbeck, Miss Marcus, and myself.
And what remuneration do you all receive?
Oh, purely nominal. Mr. Purbeck and Miss Marcus get all living expenses.
What kind of living expenses?
Oh, everything. Food, clothing, accommodation.
So Mr. Purbeck and Miss Marcus actually live at the centre?
They do.
Rent-free?
Oh, yes.
And does Mr. Purbeck have a car?
Well, there is a car supplied by the Trust for use by Mr. Purbeck.
What about you yourself, Mr. Kimber? What do you receive?
Just normal legal expenses.
Is that all?
Well, there is something else, but it is a personal matter between Mr. Purbeck and myself.
You've been very frank up until now, Mr. Kimber.
Mr. Purbeck arranges for me to receive messages.
Messages? From whom?
My wife, Kathleen, she died 17 years ago.
Ah, so you attend Mr. Purbeck's séances?
Not so much now, no.
Then how do you receive these messages?
By phone.
By the telephone?
Yes, Your Honour. Mr. Purbeck records Kathleen's messages at various séances and then plays them to me over the phone, just before I go to bed. I find them very comforting.
And you believe that these messages are genuine?
Oh, yes. Of course they are. Indubitably.
What is your opinion of Mr. Purbeck as a man?
Well, he isn't one really, is he?
I'm sorry, Mr. Kimber, I don't understand. Mr. Purbeck isn't what?
Well, just a man. Mr. Purbeck is chosen. He's holy. He's a saint.
I have no questions, Your Honour.
You may stand down, Mr. Kimber.
That concludes the evidence for the prosecution, Your Honour.
Mr. Lotterby?
For my first witness, I call the accused Simon Purbeck.
What is your religion?
I'm a spiritualist.
Take the testament in your right hand and read aloud the words on the card.
I swear by Almighty God that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
You are Simon Morris Purbeck of the Pines, West Walsham?
I am.
Mr. Purbeck, how old are you?
30.
How long have you been a medium?
For as long as I can remember.
Even as a child?
Oh, yes. From a very early age, I was aware of things other people seemed unable to see.
What kind of things?
It's hard to explain. It's as if you have sharper eyesight than other people, or better hearing.
An extra sense?
No, I don't think it's an extra sense. I think everyone possesses it, but most people don't seem to be able to use it.
You think we are all mediums?
Potentially. I don't like the word medium. I think sensitive is a better word.
When did you find people would give you money for being sensitive?
When I was 10.
10?
Yes. An aunt of mine had lost a brooch. She asked me if I knew where it was. And suddenly I did. I saw the place where it was. I described the place. My aunt went there, found the brooch, and she gave me £1.
Mr. Lotterby, I have been patient while you have questioned Mr. Purbeck on his theories of mediumship and the events of his childhood, neither of which, in my opinion, is relevant to the offence with which he is charged. I must remind you that the court's time is not limitless.
Your Honor, I was merely trying to show that Mr. Purbeck genuinely believes he has mediumistic powers and has, in fact, been aware of these since childhood.
I think your point has been made, Mr. Lotterby.
Your Honor. Mr. Purbeck, when did you first meet Mrs. Wells?
Just over 2 years ago. She came along to a lecture I gave.
Would you tell the court the purpose of these lectures?
Very briefly, I tried to convince people that we all have psychic power which we can exploit.
Now, did Mrs. Wells approach you after this lecture?
Oh, yes. She approached me after every lecture, in fact.
What did she want?
To communicate with her dead son.
What was your reply?
The first time, I pointed out that the purpose of my lectures was to enable her to do that herself.
Was she successful?
Apparently not. She continually came back to me.
Did she say why?
She wanted me to hold the séance for her.
What inducement did she offer?
Money.
Did you accept?
No.
Why not?
I never do accept money for séances. It's illegal.
Is that the only reason why you refused to accept Mrs. Wells that first time?
No. There was another reason.
What was it?
I thought she was likely to cause trouble.
What do you mean by that?
Mrs. Wells is a neurotic. You have to be very careful with clients. Otherwise, you can get involved in all sorts of emotional situations.
But you finally agreed to the séance?
Yes.
Why?
She kept on at me. Badgered my secretary.
Miss Marcus?
Yes.
Did Mrs. Wells offer you money?
Yes.
How much?
25, 50, £100. She said money was no object. You see, she was convinced that I was the only person that could get in touch with her son.
And you agreed to the séance?
In the end, yes.
Why?
It seemed the easiest way out. She can be a very persistent woman.
Did you accept money for the séance?
No. I never do.
What happened to the séance?
Well, that was unusual. I thought if it wasn't successful, and very often it isn't the first time, she'd give up, attend more lectures.
What happened?
He came.
Who?
Her son, Brian. He was there. He touched her.
How do you know this?
Well, Mrs. Wells said so. You heard her in the court.
Did you touch Mrs. Wells on the shoulder?
No.
Would it have been possible for you to have touched Mrs. Wells without anyone noticing you'd moved?
No. I was sitting in front of her. She was looking at me.
Was Miss Marcos in the room at the same time?
Yes.
Could Miss Marcos have touched Mrs. Wells?
But she wouldn't.
Why not?
Well, why should she? We didn't want Mrs. Wells at our séances. Miss Marcus herself said she was too emotional, too unstable. She was likely to be troublesome.
Would it have been possible for Miss Marcus to have touched Mrs. Wells without your seeing her?
I don't know, I suppose so.
You were in a trance.
Yes?
You can't be sure Miss Marcus didn't touch Mrs. Wells.
Well, I suppose I can't, but I am sure she wouldn't.
Whose idea was it to set up this trust?
Well, I'd always wanted a centre where people could come to study.
Whose idea was it to found the trust?
Well, I don't know, really. We talked about it for years.
You and Miss Marcus?
Yes.
When you founded the trust, you and Miss Marcus and Mr. Kimber, what was the source of your income?
I don't know.
You don't know?
No, I never handled the money side.
Who did?
Miss Marcus.
You said earlier that you never accepted money for the seances.
Yes, that's right.
But people did give you money.
Yes, but I never concerned myself with that side of things. I concentrated on giving the lectures and holding my seances.
Did you on any occasion fake the results of these seances?
No.
In your dealings with Mrs. Wells, did you intend to deceive her?
Of course not.
But when she wanted her house back, you refused.
Yes, I did.
Why?
Because she gave us that house of her own free will. We didn't ask for it. It was a voluntary gift. And by the time she and the Duke of Wellington wanted it returned...
Mr. Purbeck, if you mean Major Otway, say so. There will be no abuse of witnesses.
Sorry, Your Honour. Well, by the time she wanted the house returned, it wasn't that simple. There were people to consider.
Who?
The people who contributed to the centre, the people who used the centre. I couldn't take it from them.
Lastly, Mr. Purbeck, do you genuinely believe that you have powers beyond our normal ken? Powers that enable you to communicate with the dead?
I know I have.
Thank you, Mr. Purbeck.
Mr. Purbeck, when you first met Miss Marcos, what was your occupation?
I sold encyclopedias.
And how much did you make of that?
It varied.
Well, give us the average figure.
About 25 or 30 pounds a week.
And how much do you make now?
I don't know.
You've no idea?
No.
Well, since the trust, according to Mr. Kimber, is worth about £44,500 made in a matter of 2 or 3 years, this would put your earnings at approximately £15,000 a year.
If you say so.
There's a big difference between that and 1,500.
Obviously, yes.
Would you describe yourself as a successful medium? Oh, I'm sorry, you prefer the word sensitive.
Yes.
Well, unfortunately, the Act is called the Fraudulent Mediums Act and not the Fraudulent Sensitives.
No matter what you choose to call it, I'm not a fraud. I didn't fake anything.
Who touched Mrs. Wells on the shoulder during that first séance?
Her son, as far as I know.
Her dead son?
Yes.
Why do people give you money, Mr. Purbeck?
Because they want to. Because they believe in the idea of the centre.
And I'd had a gratitude for your séances.
How could I say? You'd have to ask them.
Mrs. Wells gave you money and a house.
She did not. She gave them to the trust.
She says she gave money and a house to the trust because it seemed to be what her dead son Brian wanted.
Yes?
But Brian, her son, spoke through you.
Not entirely.
Oh, come, Mr. Purbeck, weren't you supposed to be the channel of communication between Mrs. Wells and her dead son?
To some extent.
Well, is there another medium working on the staff at the centre?
No.
Did not Brian Wells speak through you while you were in a trance?
Yes.
And is it not a fact that this disembodied voice suggested to Mrs. Wells that she make over her house as headquarters for your centre?
Your Honour, my learned friend is in error. Mrs. Wells at no time said that any voice, embodied or disembodied, suggested she give her house to Mr. Purbeck. What she did say was, and I quote, "It seemed to be what Brian wanted, which I contend implies a presumption on the part of Mrs. Wells and not a direct request."
Your Honour, my learned friend is playing with words.
I think not, Mr. Dealey. You will rephrase your question.
As Your Honour pleases. Mr. Purbeck, were you surprised that Mrs. Wells gave her house to your trust?
No.
But nevertheless, you did not refuse the gift.
No. She insisted we accept.
How much did you pay for that suit you're wearing?
Your Honour, is this relevant?
The accused will answer the question, Mr. Lotterby.
That suit, Mr. Purbeck, what did it cost?
I simply can't remember. £60, perhaps?
And how did you obtain the suit?
I bought it.
What with?
Money.
And where did the money come from?
From the trust.
You always take money from the trust when you want something new?
I can't live on air.
Just answer the question, please, Mr. Purbeck. Yes or no?
Yes, I was given the money from the trust.
Money donated by more people who insisted that you accept it, no doubt.
Well, I have no idea of the circumstances. As I said before, I had nothing to do with the financial side, but my needs are provided for out of the trust.
It has also been stated in this court that some of these contributions were made to enable you to publish your lectures in book form.
Yes.
Has this book appeared yet?
No?
When will it appear, Mr. Purbeck?
When I consider the time is ripe.
Mr. Purbeck, in all the time you've been a full-time medium, have any of your other clients ever requested their contributions be returned?
Not as far as I know.
Have any of your clients in the past ever expressed doubt as to your capabilities as a medium?
No.
Have you ever been in a court before on any charge connected with the Fraudulent Mediums Act?
No.
Thank you, Mr. Purbeck.
Thank you, Mr. Purbeck. You will return to the dock.
For my next witness, I call Miss Carol Marcus.
Miss Carol Marcus?
What is your religion?
Church of England.
Take the testament in your right hand and read aloud the words on this card.
I swear by Almighty God that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
You are Carol May Marcus of the Pines, West Walsham?
Yes?
How long have you known Mr. Purbeck?
5 years.
You are his secretary?
Secretary, receptionist, cashier. I'm the general dog's body.
You handle the money?
Well, someone has to. Simon, Mr. Purbeck, won't.
How about Mr. Kimber?
Oh, he's one of the officers of the trust. He's not concerned with the day-to-day running of the centre.
You are?
Yes.
You meet all the clients?
Yes.
You vet them first?
Yes.
Why?
Because Mr. Purbeck is an innocent. He'd help anyone who came to see him. We have to be careful.
Why?
Because spiritualism attracts all kinds of people. Some are perfectly sincere. They've lost someone they love and they simply want to re-establish some sort of communication with them. But you also get sensation seekers, as well as the hysterical and unstable fringe.
You try and weed out the undesirables?
Yes, as far as it's possible.
But you accepted Mrs. Wells?
No, I didn't, actually. She approached Mr. Purbeck personally after a lecture and just pursued him till she got him to agree to grant her a séance.
You were against this?
I was.
Why? Did you regard her as undesirable?
Not undesirable exactly, but likely to be troublesome. Mrs. Wells is a wealthy woman, self-centred, spoilt, rather unstable, who'd lost her only son under tragic circumstances. She's one of those people who have to be the centre of attention no matter what. That's why she had to have Simon to herself, why she gave us the house, a grand gesture. She made herself our patroness.
According to Mrs. Wells, she discussed with you the possibility of giving the house to the trust.
That's true.
She says that you suggested it was perhaps what a dead son wanted.
She's mistaken.
What did happen then?
She just informed me that Brian wanted her to give us the Pines.
What was your reaction?
Very great uneasiness.
Why?
I thought we were putting ourselves far too much into her hands.
Did Mr. Purbeck or Mr. Kimber agree with you?
No, Simon had always wanted proper premises to set up the centre, and Mrs. Wells's gift seemed like a prayer answered. So I said we must do it all legally. A deed of transference, everything in black and white.
You distrusted Mrs. Wells?
I thought she was the sort of person who could change her mind overnight, which is just what she did.
She says that Mr. Purbeck seems to have less and less time for her. Is that so?
No, he didn't have less time. He just couldn't give her any more. She'd become very possessive. She wanted Simon all to herself, her own personal full-time medium. Well, he had others to consider, people who'd been coming to him for years.
These other people, these other clients, did they pay Mr. Purbeck to attend the seances?
No, they paid only to attend lectures. Simon never charged for seances.
But he did accept financial contributions and gifts.
Yes.
Miss Marcus, what were you doing when you first met Simon Purbeck? What was your job?
I was a doctor's receptionist.
Did the doctor whom you worked for specialize in any particular branch of medicine?
Yes, psychiatry.
You know, under what circumstances did you meet Mr. Purbeck?
He was a patient.
What was wrong with him?
A mild depressive condition, nothing serious.
How long was he a patient?
About a month.
Has he ever been back?
Not to my knowledge.
While he was a patient, he also worked as a salesman, selling encyclopedias?
Yes.
When did he become a full-time medium?
Shortly after that.
Long before he met Mrs. Wells?
Ooh, a good 2 years before.
Miss Marcus, you were present at that first séance with Mrs. Wells.
Yes.
Is that usual?
No. But then Mrs. Wells was not our usual type of client.
Mrs. Wells insists that someone touched her on her shoulder.
I know. She told everyone it was her son, Brian.
Was it?
How would I know?
Did you touch her?
No.
Did you see Mr. Purbeck touch her?
No.
Could you have seen it if he had?
Yes, he would have had to got out of the big chair and come across to her.
And he did not?
No.
So you genuinely believe that this was a genuine phenomenon?
No.
Could you explain, please?
If you ask me, nothing and nobody touched Mrs. Wells on the shoulder. She's one of those people who have to do everything bigger and better than everyone else. It was a typical piece of self-deception, so that Simon would devote more time to her.
Your Honour, these accusations on the part of the witness are malicious and completely without foundation.
Yes, to a certain extent I agree, Mr. Dealey. You're not here to make unpleasant comments on Mrs. Wells's character.
Your Honour, all I said was that I thought she deceived herself. That's why a medium has to be very careful.
Very well. So you will say she deceived herself?
Yes, Your Honour.
Mr. Lot, you may continue.
No more questions, Your Honour. Thank you, Miss Marcus.
Miss Marcos, I find your rationale very interesting. You suspect that Mrs. Wells deceived herself about what occurred at the séance. But did you suggest to her that she might be mistaken about the touch on her shoulder?
No.
Why not?
I hadn't the heart.
Did you later mention your suspicions to Simon Purbeck?
No.
Why not?
Because it would only have upset him.
Or perhaps Mr. Purbeck had already guessed what had happened.
Oh, Simon was in a trance. How could he have known what was happening?
But you did. Or at least you thought you did, Miss Marcos. Yet by your own admission, you told no one, you warned no one.
Not on that occasion.
Did you at any other time?
I always used to tell every client that the important thing was to be as objective as possible. I used to say that a medium was rather like a telephone exchange. It's terribly easy to get a wrong number.
But surely, after that first sensational séance, you can't expect any bereaved mother to remain objective.
Depends on the mother.
I put it to you, Miss Marcus, that by your silence you knowingly compounded a deception.
No. I didn't know it was a deception. I couldn't be 100% sure.
Yet you were just now, while you were accusing Mrs. Wells.
The case of the Queen versus Purbeck will be resumed tomorrow in the Crown Court.